1998. I'll never forget it. I mean, hello and welcome to Under the Superscope, where we take an in-depth look at some of the most famous games of all time and work out exactly what makes them so good, and whether they still hold up today. It doesn't matter if they're 5 or 35, all we want to know is why these games are fun, and what better game to take episode 2 than one that redefined an entire genre, Resident Evil 4. It may sound simple now, but that idea of putting the camera over the shoulder makes so much sense for aiming. Before this, games would just have floating reticules or change the entire perspective, but Resident Evil 4 popularized what has now become a standard of any third-person game. Sure, some other games also toyed with the idea, but when you're as miraculous as Resident Evil 4, the entire industry will start to take notice. But of course, the genre didn't stop evolving after Resident Evil 4, and with games like Gears of War only a year later, the shooter genre started to get a bit more flexible. Even Resident Evil 6 adopted the evolutions of its peers. But one question I'll put forward is this: is this evolution an enhancement? Well, in a lot of cases, yeah, sure. But for Resident Evil 4, this limited third-person gameplay has a ton of perks. See, the best games have limitations, and they relish in them. For instance, let's briefly look at double jumps in platformers. They give you more accuracy, more control, and they make landing those tricky jumps easier. So why doesn't Super Mario Bros. Have one? Well, because every level in Mario is built around that one particular jump mechanic. There isn't a pit you can't clear or an enemy you can't stomp, and not once do you think to yourself, man, I wish I could double jump right now. Mario relishes in his jumping limitations with every single aspect of his level and enemy design, and it's the exact same thing with Resident Evil 4. If we slapped on joystick controls, suddenly the whole game just doesn't work anymore. Every single enemy in Resident Evil 4 understands that you can't move and shoot. This is very deliberate. Notice how from a distance these guys will sprint towards you in a rage, only to slow down to this creepy demonic swagger. The game may have abandoned a lot of the horror aspects of the series, but one thing it didn't shake was tension. You have this constant decision to make. Is it time to run, or is it time to shoot? You read your environment, read the situation, and decipher the moment where you turn around and give them hell. Everything is designed around this stop and pop flow. That's why the enemies slow down when they're near you. If they always chased you at full speed, then you'd never have time to reload your guns or stop to aim. You need that slight head start, and what better time to slow them down than at the most horrific moment, when they're right next to you. If we just went around like this, suddenly the whole foundation of this game is gone. That calculated player risk of knowing when to shoot is so important, and sometimes games need their limitations. Breath of the Wild with its stamina meter offers a greater sense of player accomplishment when you finally scale a tall mountain. Limiting the player to 6 Pokemon incentivizes party balance, and sacrificing movement for aiming your weapon is a key pillar of what makes Resident Evil 4 so enjoyable. All of your favourite games are purposely limited in one area or another, and while options are good, the best games are the ones that provide these options by expanding upon one limited function. In Resident Evil 4, that function is your weapon. The gunplay in Resi 4 is phenomenal to say the least. You feel every single blow in Resi 4, and this makes even the most vanilla of weapons satisfying to use. If I shoot an enemy in the shoulder, they'll stagger and shake away the pain. If I shoot their legs, they'll collapse and buy me some time. And if I shoot their head or kneecaps, you get the best thing of them all: melee attacks. Now this is where the tone of Resident Evil 4 is really set in place. When you're roundhouse kicking infected villagers while passing through oncoming attacks with invincibility frames, you know this is no longer a horror game, but it is still about survival. It gives Resi 4 this tense, arcade-like action, which is further exemplified in the infinitely replayable Mercenaries mode. This does away with story and contextual pacing and just crunches on pure combat. Combat's only a small pillar of what makes this game so masterful, but it's astonishing that it holds up on that alone. Hey, they could make a whole game out of the Mercenaries and skimp on content. Wouldn't that be funny? As you make your way through the game, you're not only progressing in a linear sense, but you're also progressing as a character. Your inventory will grow, you can upgrade your weapons in any way you want, and I think this is part of what makes Resident Evil 4 so replayable. Not only is the gunplay masterful, but you always feel like you're working towards something. Best of all though, no matter how strong your gun is or how many you have, the way you use them and how you play mirrors everything you learn in only the first 5 minutes of the game. It doesn't take long at all to learn what's essentially every mechanic in Resident Evil 4, and it's all done with an invisible tutorial. Never does a message show on the screen saying, hold R to aim. Never does Leon mutter to himself out loud, if I pull this lever, maybe this gate will open. And that's not to say those kind of tutorials are bad, but Resident Evil 4 teaches the very same thing silently through level design. There's never a waypoint in this game, and that's something again Resident Evil 6 completely messes up on. In this linear hallway with only one direction, why am I being pointed in the way to go? All I focus on is this arrow, and when you take that away, you start to actually acknowledge your surroundings. When there's no waypoint or even an on-screen map, the sense of atmosphere can be so strong, and this is something Dark Souls does really well too. You just have to ensure your level design is still intelligent enough for players to go the right way. And Resident Evil 4's first chapter, 1-1, has a striking resemblance to another famous 1-1. Now I'm going to show you both levels at the same time and see if you can spot any patterns. Super Mario Bros. Opens with this calm, blank save screen. Here I can test the controls and work out that B is run and A is jump. I can try going left, only to figure out the screen doesn't scroll that way. Once I'm ready to go, I'm met with a roadblock, a Goomba. I'm forced to learn the jump mechanic and overcome this Goomba. And once the game has accepted I know how to jump, it's time to iterate and expand upon that key mechanic. Next, we have multiple pipes all differing in height. What this is teaching us is we can jump in different ways. If we hold down A for longer, we'll jump higher. And we'll also learn that momentum carries into our jumps. The faster I move, the further I jump. Now what Mario has is a lot of space to continue to teach, expand, and iterate upon the basics. He'll run and jump through basic designs with one or two enemies occasionally occupying the screen. Now here comes the climactic ending for Mario. 4 Goombas. The most we've seen together so far, but it's nothing we aren't prepared for with everything we've learned. So let's quickly recap from the perspective of Resident Evil 4. Empty space with no threat to learn the controls. Pushed in the right way if I try to turn back. One-on-one encounter with a Ganado who we have to defeat to progress. Iterate with 3 more Ganados while mixing in running and shooting. We're moving in different ways. Space to continue to teach, and then a culmination of everything you've learned. In this brief segment, we've already become masters of this game. We know to balance running and gunning. We learned that in only our second encounter. We know about melee attacks, probably by accident through trial and error. And we're even taught to explore through visual design. Mario has these tantalizing floating blocks, and Resident Evil 4 has boxes a lighter shade than anything else on screen, which draws attention to them. Of course, Resi 4's 1-1 has a fun lack to it after the village encounter, but the core fundamentals of teaching remain the same as Super Mario Bros. This is essentially a 3D version of it, and with that come a few original ideas to keep the player on the right path. What Resident Evil 4 does a lot of is camera framing and contextual cutscenes. Right at the start, the camera faces us forwards as that's the direction to progress, and though we can turn around, we're quickly told that's not the right way to go. As we move forward, we get a cutscene showing us the inside of a house. This doesn't necessarily give us story, but it gives us a goal: see what's inside the house. This is further encouraged by the camera, which is now framed towards the door. If we continue to ignore this and try to go the other way, we'll find a truck blocking our path. Lesser games, like Resident Evil 6, rely on waypoints to guide the player, but this is such poor visual design. The levels should be smart enough to not only look like a convincing world, but one with a clear direction. It's a tricky balance, but Resident Evil 4 always pulls it off. It's not just visual cues either, sound is just as important. Shortly after Leon's killed 4 Ganados, you'll hear the whimpering of a dog. His colours don't necessarily stand out and the camera doesn't focus on him, but the audio design is so distinct that you're still drawn to this creature that's hardly even visible in the camera frame. What follows is a common trick to humanise characters, where to make them seem less like murderous psychopaths, you'll have them rescue a cat out of a tree, or in this case, save a dog. If you do this, you'll be rewarded for it later, but there's no prompt telling you this. Again, Leon doesn't mutter, "Hey, if I throw this dog a bone, maybe he'll throw me one later." You just do it because the sound design draws attention to this vulnerable creature. Sound is usually used as a warning in Resident Evil 4. You can hear the 3D direction of enemies, and soundtrack cues let you know when it's okay to relax. The melody of the Merchant in particular is this relaxing score that lets you know it's okay to let your guard down. Though we've nailed the mechanics early on, how we expand upon them continues to be taught through the very same methods: visual design, sound design, and contextual cutscenes. Let's fast forward all the way to 3-1. As we step forward, a cutscene triggers to show us 2 enemies preparing a device that launches projectiles. There's a red barrel next to them. Then we're back in control and the projectile's been launched, but it won't hit us as it's too far away. But it does hit a nearby structure and completely demolishes it. So what have we learned in those few seconds? Well, we know the location of the enemy with a clear idea of how to take them down, being the red barrel, and we know their shots are powerful enough to take down stone structures. From here, we'll continue forward in the only clear direction, while being sure to avoid projectiles using both sound and shadows. Now iteration kicks in. There are more of them, but we also see what we saw in the cutscene, red barrels. If we take cover in this small structure over here and occasionally pop out, we can deal with them one by one. Stuff like this happens all the time in Resident Evil 4. In 3-4, an enemy from above throws an explosive that won't hit us, but it tells us he's there and to look out for him. Here's a giant death machine accelerating towards me, and a brief cutscene shows us 2 enemies manning it. Now I know what to aim for. Here's a ceiling coming down to crush me, but the camera is framed in a way that emphasizes these red patches, which of course we shoot because that's what we're taught to do with shiny things. In fact, a lot of the game's cutscenes really don't have anything to do with the story. Most are to set up gameplay possibilities. Near the end of the game, after your fight with Krauser, you'll naturally be quite low on ammo, and lo and behold, you're joined by a fighter jet who does all the shooting for you. The cutscene establishes it, you collect ammo along the way, and then unfortunately get shut down during a cutscene. So what did this add to the story? Well, beyond building a little more anger towards Sadler, nothing. This was purely contextual for the gameplay segment. So's this, so is this, so is this, and so is this. In other instances, the game uses colour to emphasize importance or interactivity. We've already touched upon red barrels, but how about our first interaction with blue medallions? Now these are hidden around the game, and shooting enough of them will grant us a free weapon. But how do we learn about them? Well, as soon as we enter this screen, your eyes will immediately focus on the colour blue, amongst the browns and greys. The blue poster is of course the primary draw, but you'll also likely see a smaller, sparkling blue object above it. Of course we shoot it, because that's what we do in this game. Now the poster does explain what these medallions are, but if you're like me, then you just wouldn't have even bothered to read it. I already know to look out for them because now my eye is drawn to the vibrant colour blue, and this mysterious counter came up telling me there's more of them. Even boxes and crates follow this philosophy. They're a much brighter shade of brown, which makes them stand out. When we first meet a Garordor, don't these golden bells stand out? Well, the cutscene shows us his eyes are sewn shut, and he doesn't seem to track us like other enemies. Soon you discover he only responds to sound, and suddenly those bright golden bells are almost ringing themselves. And then there's other instances of visual aid. Resi 4 never requires you to move the camera, as turning is handled just by moving left and right. So to help with depth perception, these swinging blades have an ingrained line on the ground to show you exactly where you shouldn't be standing. And again here, the camera moves automatically to show us the best angle for these moving pillars. It's a far cry from the fixed camera of classic Resident Evil games, but Resident Evil 4 makes very intelligent use of its angles. It knows when to pan out, it knows what to focus on, and it knows where to position you after a cutscene. At the time, manual camera control wasn't at all popular with Japanese players, and so many Japanese developed games like Devil May Cry and Metal Gear Solid 2 continue to ignore the right stick for camera control, and there's a case to argue that all 3 of these games relish in that limitation. We can move the camera, but it's not a huge help, and actually in moments like this where I'm being chased by a mob, I don't need to turn around to see if they're still following me, for 2 reasons. 1, I can hear them with the sound design, and 2, the visual design tells me they're still following as Ashley is looking back for me. Now let's talk a bit more about Ashley. Escort missions, I feel, are given an unwarranted poor reputation. Sure, there are some games that execute the practice poorly, but that's true of any mechanic. Now, we don't partner with Ashley until 1.5 hours into the game. In that time, we've taken down a village, an outpost, a giant sea monster. We've learned not to rely on headshots as they now spout these giant tentacly things. We've faced a pack of wolves and toppled a giant ogre. It's safe to say Leon is practically a superhero at this point, and we're more than comfortable with everything the game has thrown at us. And here's where things are grounded. Ashley makes this newly found expert player vulnerable. She's an extra body to look out for, an extra person to heal. Importantly though, Ashley doesn't limit Leon in any way. Everything we've learned is still the same, and she'll even lock behind us while aiming, or if we're parted, she'll duck when in our line of sight. What Ashley does is provide an extra layer of tension to a player who's become too comfortable with the game. Suddenly you may start taking things slower. Maybe you aren't going to run through a horde of enemies as your hitbox is essentially twice as large. And if you really don't like Ashley, you can just put her in a bin and come back for her later. And that's kind of the interesting part of Ashley. Upon replaying the game, she accompanies us far less frequently than I remember. In fact, most of the time it's just Leon on his own, and the game is really intelligent about when to separate the two. Basically, segments with fast enemies do not feature Ashley. There's a segment where Leon and Lewis take on a horde of infected as they stay locked in a house. Ashley is nowhere to be found as she shut herself in a cupboard upstairs, and she just so happens to stay outside before the boss fight with Chief Mendez. She gets captured at the end of 2-3, and what do you know, the first enemy encounter of 3-1 is this fast, invisible insect monster. Oh, and she just so happens to get captured again before an encounter with the very same enemies. In fact, she's captured by them. Ashley's never present when you face these guys. Ashley achieves her goal of grounding the player, and she's never present in a moment where she'd be a hindrance. I also like how she does this when you shoot down enemies on the cable car. Nothing big, just a nice detail. Only potential design flaw with Ashley is if you don't have a rifle during this segment, things can get a little tricky, and you may accidentally kill her. Being over-encumbered sucks, right? It's a chore in games like Skyrim where you've picked up too much stuff and then suddenly have to sort through your inventory. So why does Resident Evil 4 get it right? Well, I think a part of it comes down to the hands-on approach. Your weapons menu is essentially inside a briefcase and you're manually able to squeeze in whatever you can. This causes you to understand the selectiveness. You can't just bring along 5 rocket launchers and kill everything in one hit. You may sometimes even have to sell off a beloved weapon as you simply don't have the space. Every time you visit the merchant, you're making these conscious decisions of, do I use my money to buy a larger case, buy new weapons, or upgrade my existing ones? And maybe this is all incentivized from being so involved with the process that you're committed to play along with it. The only issue here is I would have liked some quick D-pad mapping for the weapons. Especially later in the game, you'll be opening up your menu a lot to change weapons, and it can get a bit tedious. More than maybe any other game, Resident Evil 4 knows when to change things up. It is the king of pacing. Throughout this adventure, we disrupt lovely villagers just trying to have a nice time. We sail the seas, we have bombastic moments full of terror and hordes of infected. And then we have quiet moments with the familiar blue flame of the merchant, where we know we're safe, we can upgrade our weapons and buy new ones. And then we're being chased by a giant robot version of one of the main villains. It knows exactly when to let off, when to let you just soak in the environment and catch your breath, and when to throw you into the deep end. From beginning to end, we consistently see new forms of enemies and new situations for older ones. Here's a neat form of evolving a simple concept. There's a trip mine here that I should shoot from a distance, otherwise I'll take damage from the explosion. Oh look, the explosion killed those birds, and those birds dropped money. Fast forward to later, and oh look at these unsuspecting birds just lying around. Now we're in the money. Then we take the concept a step further on actual enemies. They're also neatly lined up here. Just makes sense. And again here, only this time they're further away, so I have a real chance of missing. The game's essentially split into 3 acts. The village, the castle, and the island. I often hear the sentiment that the quality dips after the village, but I disagree. I mean, sure, the village is one of the finest openings of any video game, but would a 10-hour adventure set solely there continue to engross? I'm not so sure. Resident Evil 4 is a game about building upon a foundation, and to dwindle in one location kinda goes against every other aspect of the game. Even when you revisit areas, they're different. Unlike previous Resi games set in small open areas full of backtracking, Resi 4 is very linear, but it never really feels like that because environments loop around. Here's the village on 3 different occasions during 3 different chapters. Sure, we're back in the same area, but each time we come and go through a different door. Watch how it plays out here, and here, and here. Instances like this make the game feel like more than just a string of levels and along the lines of a real, fully connected world. It's done again in the castle where we need 3 pieces of this ornament to open a gated door. We don't go around on a fetch quest to find these pieces. We carry on as normal and just push onward. We pick up the pieces via normal means, never backtracking, and eventually we've looped back into the room from a previously locked door. And again here, we need a medallion to open this door. We find another path, go through an elaborate underground mine where we somehow end up on this minecart roller coaster, which then manages to loop us all the way around the map and back to where we first started, and then we finish off by picking up the medallion and opening the door. When we can picture how things connect, we stop viewing them as segments of a game and start appreciating the context behind the environment, and Resi 4 is full of context. Sure, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense how an unarmed person can drop ammo or then throw their axe and somehow pull out another one, but it finds the line between fun and immersion. Check out this set piece here. We run along the rim of this dam without really thinking anything of it, and as we carry on, we find a path blocked by a waterfall. So we carry on going the only clear direction we can until we find a lever. Now let me show you an edited version of what we need to see purely from a gameplay perspective. Now let me show you what we actually see. The game loves explaining its mechanisms and how things work, and it makes me appreciate the level design that much more. There's even a side mode called Separate Ways that adds further context to the story. Here you play as Ada Wong on an adventure parallel to Leon's, and it explains things like why the bell rang during the village sequence, what this dashboard was intended for, and why Lewis leaves the house after the onslaught. I never really questioned any of these holes during the main story, but it's really satisfying to understand the context behind everything. Going back to the village, castle, island tiering, it's almost a disservice to generalise the game's content under such small labellings, because this is all village, this is all castle, and this is all island. Just like the enemy, weapon, and puzzle variety, the locations change so frequently, and as does the tone. The island may be one of the most bombastic playgrounds the game has to offer, but then you hear these eerie moans. The Regenerators. The build-up to this encounter is incredibly tense as we explore the testing lab full of discarded experiments. Every single time you enter a room, you expect one to jump to life, and then when we finally see one, boy is it terrifying. Usually cutscenes introduce new elements, but this is purely in-game, and the island plays with our expectations again. We're taught that the lack of music means that we're safe, but then we encounter this enemy in pure silence, and then moments after... Oven Man! The island is also home to whatever you class this as. It's certainly a broad location. Resident Evil 4 is packed with ideas, and the pacing of each one is executed near perfectly, but at the forefront of it all are the simple mechanics you learned in only the first few minutes. I don't personally believe good games can age. I believe genres can evolve, and graphics may become dated, but the best games are the ones like Resident Evil 4 that dedicate themselves to their limitations. I mean, I've spent dozens of hours just in the Mercenaries mode, which should in theory be the most limited and repetitive area in the game. Yet after 13 years, it still feels as fresh as it ever did. Fun doesn't age, so while a lot of modern shooters may have new standards, how many of them will we still be playing a decade later? How many of them are truly designed around their limitations, and is the structure housing those limitations intelligent? Well, Resident Evil 4 is so intelligent. Not only is it mechanically excellent, but every single element is pure fun. There's no perfect game, but if I had to pinpoint some with the fewest flaws, this would make the cut. Resident Evil 4 still holds up, and it's one of the greatest games of all time.
No way, Leon!
Way?
I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
Thanks for watching everyone, and be sure to subscribe to GameXplain for more episodes from Under the Super Scope and other things gaming too. See you next week. Bye. Oh actually no, hold on. Reload animations. Okay, now we can go. Bye everyone, do the subscribe thing.